evaluation from HUD. Sorry, I had a little pop-up. All right, so in order to receive our annual allocation, the city is required to submit a series of documents to HUD. Every 5 years, we complete what's called the consolidated plan, and this is a 5-year assessment of housing and community development needs specific to Flagstaff. The last time we turned this in was in 2021. It's defined our goals for the last 4 years. And this upcoming program year, 2025, is the last annual action plan for this 5-year plan. So this fall, we will create a new 5-year plan. And then every year we submit this annual action plan. It tells HUD what we're going to do with this year's entitlement funding for the upcoming program year. And it also talks about how those funded projects and activities will meet the goals that we've identified in the consolidated plan. Next is our consolidated annual performance evaluation report, which we refer to as our CAPER. And that tells HUD what we did with the funds and the accomplishments of those funded projects. We also outline whether or not we met our goals, and if not, why not. And then occasionally we also submit amendments to our annual action plans, maybe to incorporate additional congressional funding through things like the CARES Act, that was COVID relief, or if we were to receive disaster recovery funding. This would also accommodate if we needed to switch funds from one project to another. And then lastly, historically, we've always submitted a fair housing plan. This is no longer required, and so we're kind of at the drawing board deciding how the city's response to affirmatively furthering fair housing might continue to exist, even though it's no longer required. So how can the city spend its CDBG money? So essentially, as our city council sees fit, but based on the community needs we've identified, the primary objective, and one or more of what we call our national objectives, which I will go over next. So the primary objective of the CDBG program is to develop viable urban communities, and that can be through the provision of decent housing, a suitable living environment, or economic opportunities. It's really important to know that at least 70% of our CDBG funds must be used to benefit exclusively low and moderate income persons. And historically, we're really proud that we've always used 100% of our funds to benefit low and moderate income households. So those regulations are required. What does it mean for a household to be low and moderate income? Most of you are experts at this by now, but just to give you a refresher, it means that you are at or below 80% of the area median income as an entire household. So for a family of 4, that would be $79,900. Along with meeting that primary objective, our projects must meet a national objective. So that can be benefiting low and moderate income persons, aiding in the prevention or elimination of slums or blight, or meeting a need that has a particular urgency. So if we were to have a disaster or an emergency and we needed to put those funds towards any sort of urgent need. All right, so these are some of the activities that benefit low and moderate income persons. That's the national objective we pretty much have always used. I think there's maybe been some situations where we've used others, but as long as I've been here, we've always used our CDBG funds for the benefit of low and moderate income persons. So what kind of activities can we undertake that's included in that? So the first one is a limited clientele activity. This is meant to benefit low to moderate income persons or those who are presumed to be low and moderate income. So to give an idea, determined low and moderate income means that folks are submitting their proof of income, their household size, their assets, and then we are doing a calculation to confirm that their AMI is under 80%. But we're also allowed to use what's called a presumed benefit. And those presumed benefit groups include folks like severely disabled adults, survivors of domestic violence, homeless individuals, and the elderly. So in those cases, we do not have to income qualify. Oh, and one example of a project like that is rehab at a homeless shelter or transitional housing. So we are working to assist Flagstaff Shelter Services with their projects at the Crown and the Lantern, and that is an example of a limited clientele activity. We can also undertake area benefit projects. These must benefit all of the residents in a low-income neighborhood. And a low-income neighborhood is a neighborhood that has 51% of households that are low to moderate income. Most of the time, our area benefit projects are neighborhood revitalization or infrastructure projects. For example, we just were able to use CDBG funds to create a small park outside the Murdoch Center. You can see it in that photo. If you remember, it was kind of just a fence in a field, and now it's this beautiful little park. So to give you an idea of what our target neighborhoods are, or our target areas where we can do area benefit projects, it includes La Plaza Vieja, Sunnyside, Southside, and Pine Knoll. So in our consolidated plan, we identified these as our target neighborhoods for CDBG funds. And we did this not only on the concentration of low and moderate income households, but also on minority household concentrations. And when we do our next consolidated plan, we may be able to add to some of these areas depending on the most recent census numbers. The next kind of activity is a housing activity. These are meant to provide and improve permanent residential structures that will be occupied by low to moderate income persons. And so an example of this is that we assisted Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona with the acquisition of now 4 affordable rental units at the Miramonte Homes Ponderosa Parkway condos. And you can see a photo of that development here. And these are it's a market rate complex other than these low and moderate income reserved condos. So it's called mixed income. So down payment assistance and closing cost assistance is also an eligible activity under this. But when we found what we found historically is that Flagstaff housing prices are just too high for individuals under 80% of the area median income to purchase homes with CDBG, unless that assistance is layered with many other types of funds. So that's why the city has used bond funding or city general funds to administer community homebuyer assistance since we've stopped using CDBG for it. And then we also can undertake job creation or retention activities. One example is we funded job training and creation at Sharon's Attic. This is an activity that we don't typically fund because it can be very difficult. There's a lot of tracking that goes into tracking that jobs have been created and retained over 3 to 5 years, depending on the project. And so that can be really challenging for subrecipients to provide that data. And so we typically have not undertaken this activity very often. All right, so I talked about that consolidated plan, and I want to explain kind of what our consolidated plan goals are right now. So our first objective is to support neighborhood revitalization and public facilities, as well as infrastructure improvements. And this is especially in those established target areas. So this might include public facility or infrastructure improvements. It could also include acquisition of affordable housing. Our next objective is to support public services and economic opportunities for LMI persons. That can include services to meet basic needs, workforce development or job training, and housing stabilization services such as rental assistance or eviction prevention. And then we also have an objective to support services and projects addressing homelessness. So maybe operating support for a homeless shelter or helping with construction in a way that would increase shelter beds or transitional housing units. And lastly, we have a goal of supporting the development and accessibility and preservation of decent affordable housing. So this can include rehab of owner or renter household units, the development of housing units, or housing assistance for owner or renter households. It is important to know that as far as the development of affordable housing units goes, there are only certain organizations that can build new housing and have that be paid for by CDBG. And those are community development or community housing development organizations. And so at this time, I'm pretty sure Housing Solutions is the only one who is allowed under that rule to build new housing using CDBG funds. All right, a couple other things to know. HUD has a couple caps on how we're allowed to use our funds. The first one is a 20% maximum on administration. So this pays for management and oversight, program coordination, including staff salaries and indirect costs. And it's important to know that not only is the city required to not spend over this maximum, but our subrecipients as well. So if a subrecipient receives CDBG funds for construction, they can spend 20% of that on administering the project, but no more. The other cap is a public service activity cap. It's 15% of our entire annual entitlement. And so this is for things like employment and education services, so job training, childcare, crime prevention, healthcare or substance abuse treatment, counseling. This can include rental assistance, senior citizen services, and pretty much any sort of welfare programs. So typically the city maxes out that because it's a very competitive category. We have a lot of public services that are in need of funds. And then we use 10% of our admin funds on indirect costs and 10% on our administration. So perhaps placing ads in the newspaper or paying someone to administer the program. And then we also are required to spend down our funds in a timely manner. So HUD does not want us holding on to funds. And we are required to do a test annually. It's on May 2nd every year. It's called the 1.5 test. And it just really holds us accountable for spending those funds. We're not allowed to bank unused funds. And if we have a total account balance that is over 1.5 times our current year's allocation, then we're in violation of that. So our current year's allocation is 588,000. So that puts, oh, I should know this by heart. That puts us at a max of about 140,000 or $840,000 that we can have available. And so one of the things that can make this difficult is something called program income. The city has loans from past owner-occupied housing rehab projects or from assisting folks with buying their house. And when those individuals sell their homes, they pay back their loan to us. It has no payments until they sell or choose not to live there anymore. And so we do our best to spend our funds, but if we all of a sudden have 10 people decide to sell their house and pay back their $20,000 loans, that can be really difficult. And so we keep an eye on this throughout the year. We have been untimely, along with many other entitlements. HUD has assured us that everybody seems to be struggling with this. Coming out of the pandemic and the surplus of money that everyone received, a lot of entitlements have struggled to be able to spend their funds timely. And so right now we are working a workout plan and we are really close to being able to meet our goal. We're about $20,000 away from our goal on May 2nd. So we're expecting to receive some reimbursement requests from our subrecipients in order to make sure that we meet that goal this year. All right, so how do we go about allocating funds? So we hold what's called an open proposal process. It's conducted every year, and it allows Flagstaff agencies to apply for those funds. And CDBG regulations require a lot of public participation every step of the way. So we have public meetings and hearings. We invite the community and nonprofit organizations to come and talk to us about what they see in their community as a need. We had a specific meeting for neighborhoods, for those target neighborhoods over at the Market of Dreams. And we got a lot of feedback about, feeling like some beautification along some of the streets in Sunnyside would be helpful. Playground equipment in certain neighborhoods. We also heard feedback from folks that it can be really difficult to access a bus pass when you are experiencing homelessness. And so those are things that we consider as we choose funding options for the year ahead. So we started this in February and we released a NOFA in early February. Proposals were due back in March. Now we have our annual action plan draft available for anyone to comment on. We're presenting our recommendations to you today, and then we will also go to City Council to present those recommendations as well. So our NOFA, our Notice of Funding Availability, has an application or a guideline for creating a proposal of how to use funds for our partner agencies. And in that, we ask applicants to define how their project will help the city meet its 10-year housing plan goals. So that's impacting residents with unit creation or subsidies, or creating and preserving housing units with a goal of 10% of those being affordable. And so we work to make sure that we are considering that. Doesn't mean that a project is not eligible if it doesn't meet one of those goals, but it is something we consider as we choose projects to fund. We also consider the current city council's priorities. So every 2 years when we have new council members, we come to them, we give them kind of a CDBG 101 and explain how it works, and then ask them how they would like the funds to be prioritized. So this last January, City Council wanted to prioritize funds for projects that address housing, rental and ownership housing, addressing homelessness, neighborhood revitalization projects, and workforce job training projects. So the first thing that the housing staff considers when we're evaluating applications is we do a thorough risk assessment. The most important thing to remember here is that the city of Flagstaff is the responsible entity to HUD. So if something goes wrong, if something doesn't get finished or doesn't get done correctly, the city can't say, oh, that darn ABC organization, they didn't do it right. HUD doesn't care. They say, oh, no, it's the city of Flagstaff who didn't do it right. And you guys are held responsible to that. So we take it very seriously who we provide funds to. In addition to the things I mentioned before, we also consider the organization's federal grant experience, how we feel they would be able to abide by the necessary rate of expenditure to be sure that we won't have any timeliness issues. And then the ability to abide by city contract requirements and federal overlay statutes. So this includes things like fair housing, we have to do environmental reviews, labor standards, federal procurement, and actually organizations are required to follow the city procurement code, ADA compliance, and then we do a thorough monitoring and audit at contract closeout. So we also take it very seriously to assess whether or not an organization has the capital funds or the liquid funds to request reimbursement through this grant. This isn't a grant where you get $100,000 in your bank account. This is a grant where you submit $100,000 in bills and then we reimburse you for having paid those. So I talked a little bit already about public participation opportunities. We already did a meeting with the neighborhoods. We had a no-fly release meeting for our organizations in town who might be interested in submitting proposals. And then we're in the middle of our public comment period. We're presenting to you today. We'll present to council on April 22nd. And then we will ask City Council for a resolution approving our submission of our annual action plan to HUD. That meeting will be on May 6th. And then our annual action plan is due to HUD on May 15th. All right, so let's get into this year's funding allocation recommendations. I'm just going to give you an overview of the proposals that we received. The first one I'm going to go over is a housing activity. I'm going to differentiate between our housing activities and our public service activities. It can be tricky sometimes to remember that we only have a finite amount of funds for public service projects. And this housing activity is not in that category. So we don't have the cap on funds to use for housing activities. So Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona submitted an application requesting funds that will assist them in the acquisition of an additional 2 units of permanently affordable rental housing. This will be a studio and a 1-bedroom. And this is similar to those 4 that they were able to acquire at the Miramonte Ponderosa Parkway condo development. And so our funds will offset the purchase. Housing Solutions will still have financing on these units to complete purchase, and then they'll be leased to 2 low and moderate income households. That was the only housing activity application we received this year. So I'm going to go into our public service applications. Community assistance teams of Flagstaff requested operating funds for their Cats on Wheels program. This program includes reconditioning used bicycles, repairing them, and then distributing them to individuals in need. So folks experiencing homelessness, they also donate them to schools for children who can benefit from the use of a maintained bicycle. So they're also hosting bicycle maintenance clinics and providing no-cost bike repair. And they requested operation funds. So that means salary, rent, things that allow them to run the program. Next up is Homeless Youth Connection. This organization requested $40,000 to pay for operations for their Empowering Youth for the Future program. This would serve 30 youth that are experiencing homelessness. It provides them with a dedicated youth coach, and that youth coach can help with educational and employment goals. They can also help provide essential support for food, clothing, transportation to doctor's appointments, helping them get their driver's license, helping them apply for permanent housing, things like that. They are able to see that a lot of youth are able to graduate much more successfully despite the challenge of experiencing homelessness when they have that support. And the funds would pay for the salary of the youth coach. Northland Family Help Center requested funds for a case manager at their youth shelter. This would pay the salary of the case manager And that person would be able to work with the youth that are residing at their youth shelter. These are individuals who are under 18. It will allow them to help them address educational employment needs and helping them identify housing for when they age out of the shelter at 18 or when they're just ready to move into permanent housing. Sometimes they have funding as well to help set them up in that housing with rental assistance for the first month or beyond. Whoops, I went backwards. And then Tinkertopia requested funds for a public service project that would also have an area benefit to Sunnyside. So they are intending to open what they call the Tinker Space Initiative. And it's meant to be a creative hub, primarily designed for youth ages 14 and up, but available to all. And they'll provide mentorship and programs for career readiness and STEAM experiences in the hopes that it will prepare students for high demand technical careers. Perhaps they can start their own businesses. You can think of it kind of as a makerspace, 3D printers, things that will allow them to gain those skills to hopefully enter a technical workforce. And they requested $120,000 to pay for salaries of 2 program administrators. All right, so what kind of funding do we have available this year? Well, we don't know quite yet, and we usually never know at this point. It takes HUD a while. After Congress approves the budget, it takes HUD a while to calculate what each entitlement will get, but we're going to estimate based on the past 2 years that we will likely get around $535,000. And then we also have program income to combine with that. Program income, I explained, is those loans that have been paid back to the city. We expect we'll get about $130,000. And then we have reallocated funds. These are funds that we allocated to projects in past years, and they're being de-obligated. These funds are from our owner-occupied housing rehabilitation program. We have a couple of households in the works to be served, but we're finding that those funds are moving slower than we intended. And so we're going to reallocate those funds to make sure we're spending them on a timely basis. And so our estimated total funding available is about $695,000. And then you'll remember those caps we have. We can spend $139,000 of these funds on administration and indirect, and we can spend a max of $95,250 on public services. That leaves us with $462,000 for housing activities. So here's that overview of the proposals we received. You can see that in the public service category, we had requests well beyond what we have available in funds. This happens every single year. One of the things that we see advocacy for the most under CDBG is for that cap, that 15% cap to increase, because every community faces this, where those operational funds are just so needed by our community partners. And now I'm going to share with you how the ranking committee scored these individual proposals and what we determined our recommendations to be. So you can see that our admin indirect amount is a little less than what we are allowed. And we just try to do that every year, even if it's just a little, just to give us some cushion and wiggle room, because HUD takes those percentage caps very seriously. So we intend to use $138,000 on admin and indirect, $95,000 on public services, and then we have the remainder of funds for our housing activities. And so we propose to fully fund Housing Solutions' acquisition of rental units. And then staff is going to work to identify a project that will benefit the community and that is needed in the community with the remaining funds. So we're exploring, are there other opportunities for acquiring more units? Is there playground equipment in some of our target neighborhoods that we could replace easily, utilizing these funds and having a really big impact on the households that live there? And then for our public services, you can see that we've just funded in order of points. So we awarded full funding to the highest scoring application, Northland Family Help Center, and then full funding to the next highest scoring for Homeless Youth Connection. And then we ran out of funds. And so we don't have any additional funds to provide to community assistance teams of Flagstaff or Tinkertopia. Now, if our allocation our entitlement allocation comes in much higher, then we likely would still not provide funds to these activities, because it is incredibly unlikely that it would be enough to fund them in a way that would be impactful. It might be $2,000 to $4,000. The burden of administering federal funds it costs much more than $2,000 to $4,000. It costs organizations a lot of administrative time. So we try to not award contracts that are that low. So these are the recommendations that we intend to take to City Council. We are hoping to get your comments, to have you discuss, and then these are some ideas for a motion. You could forward the funding out. You could vote to forward the funding allocation recommendations with a recommendation for approval as they are written by City Council. You could forward them with comments. You could say, we'd really prefer this or that, or we have concerns about XYZ. Or you can vote to not approve the funding recommendations and forward them. In that case, I would request comments as to why that might be for council's benefit. But those are some options. And then just those dates again, in case you want to tune in to those meetings with City Council. But otherwise, I'm here to answer any questions you might have or just to help facilitate discussion amongst yourselves.
Thanks, Christine. With that, I will recuse myself.
Thank you, Devonna, or Council or Commissioner McLaughlin.
I should shut this thing. For a little pressure cooker. Do we still have quorum? Has anybody dropped off?
Good question.
That's a great question. Last time we checked, it was 5 commissioners online. Let's make sure. We're good. Thank you.
Seems pretty simple, a discussion, then a motion, so.
The request for
Yeah.
comment on them.
Go ahead. Commissioner Ross?
Hi, thanks so much, Christine, city staff. This is a big undertaking for our community. Every year, it's a very big deal. I know it's a ton of work going into it just to get us to this place. So I don't have any questions. I'm happy to make a motion if we're at that space. I guess I could do that, and then people can jump in at that point, or should I wait?
See if anyone else wants to bring up a discussion, something to discuss, and go forward with the motion.
Commissioner Kellogg looks like.
I just had one question on the,
I'll go back to that slide. It might be helpful.
allocations. That one. The 182,000 to the city of Flagstaff, that's TBD. Who and what determines where that money goes and how it's allocated or used? Sorry.
That's a great question. So when we've had this happen in the past, and it does happen sometimes, these projects are very burdensome to take on when you use federal funding. And so you may see projects in the community that these funds could technically be used for. And the organization didn't want to apply for them just because they knew that it would be so much work to administer it and potentially not enough money. You know, sometimes these projects take upwards of $1 million and $100,000 in funds that are federalized and really some can be difficult to administer, are maybe not enough to make it worth it. And so in the past, staff has determined a project based on internal conversations and those needs that have been identified at community meetings and in the con plan. Some of the things that we've talked about that would probably be the most likely would be an acquisition of an additional unit. So we are exploring whether or not our partners could potentially purchase another affordable unit with those funds. And then we're also exploring the possibility of replacing playground equipment in various parks. So the playground equipment in, for example, some of our housing authority or public housing developments is quite aged. And we think it would be a really impactful, but relatively easy and affordable project to bring a great benefit. We also know that our League of Neighborhoods really advocates to see that the funds be used both for affordable housing and public services, but also neighborhood revitalization. Sometimes they feel that that's an important piece that gets left out. And so these would be internal staff conversations. We would bring ideas to City Council and receive their feedback. They would make that final decision. And folks are more than welcome to provide public input here or in writing to me in an email or through a conversation that we would also take into consideration.
Thank you.
If I can add, so final is city council. Quite often when we've, not quite often, when we've had this happen before, we've had something that capital, the capital division has ready to slide in. We can complete funding for sidewalk project, or we can. What Christine was talking about is enough money. There isn't anything that fits in that category right now. So we're looking at the playground equipment, or is there another acquisition opportunity, that type of thing. I anticipate we will have that pinned down before we get to city council. We just have not been able to put a bow on top of it before today. But it will ultimately be decided by the city council in a public format. Yeah. It's not SAP's secret pot of money that we.
No, I was just curious because you were explaining the process of how you have to account for those funds. So if it's not already a program, how are you accounting for where that money is allocated and if it meets the percentages that were explained earlier?
We prefer to award the money into the community if at all possible, but we understand that it is, I think the word Christine has chosen today is burdensome, and it's hard to spend.
And I think it's overwhelming, especially for some of the smaller
Absolutely.
programs that don't have a full staff.
Yeah.
That can oversee the administration of that.
Completely agree with you.
And this it would be required that this be a housing or a public improvement. So either the acquisition or something similar to like the Murdoch Park we put in. Because we have that public service cap and we've met it, we wouldn't be able to select a public service project. So it's not uncommon for the city to request funds for internal projects like the park or street improvements. But like Ms. Dar said, it can be really difficult when street improvements cost $700,000 and we only have less than 200 and they don't have any other funds to make up that gap.
Yeah, very thorough explanation. Do we have any more comments or questions from online in the chat?
Take public comment.
And I'm not seeing any hands raised in the room. So if we have anyone who is in the room or online for public comment, we'll want to move to that.
I keep looking at you. I'm sorry.
I'm just getting an education.
And no one online for public comment? Okay. In that case, is any of the commissioners comfortable making a motion?
Oh.
I'll make a motion
Yeah, go ahead and state the motion, Ross.
to
Commissioner
forward
Ross?
funding. Yes, I'll make a motion to forward the funding allocation recommendations with recommendations for approval by city council as presented.
Seconded.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Ross and a second from Commissioner Flores to forward funding allocation recommendations with a recommendation for approval by city council. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that motion carries.
Thank you all so
And-
much. It was great to present to you today, and I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine.
Bring back our chair. Owen.
Do I have to take over again? Alright. So I think we're on item 7A then. It's presentation and discussion. Items A is an overview of Housing Commissioner's agenda item. Topic suggestions from the December 19th, 2024 meeting. This is informational only, and I believe I'm handing it over to Adriana.
Thank you, Chair. Right. Good afternoon, Housing Commissioners. I'm Adriana Fisher, your Housing Commissioner and the Housing Program Manager for the City of Flagstaff Housing Office. In December, you will recall that we
had a little activity where we allowed the Housing Commission to recommend agenda topics.
Adriana, there's a
items.
request for you to make that bigger on the screen, please.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
Ms.
that's
Czar.
relevant to what you're doing.
How's that looking? Okay, in the room. You also have a copy with your agenda. Because that's easier to look at. So we're here today to go over the list. Shockingly, there was only a few items that were at the top of the list. There was actually 3 items that were the highest scoring, and those items either we're already working on, they're already being addressed in some manner, or they will be addressed in a future meeting. So if you, I don't want to read word by word, but I do want to let you know the plan of action. So this will be a very short conversation. There was a request to have builders and developers included to see what their frustrations and concerns are with developing in Flagstaff. This will be, this was partially addressed at the February meeting through Tiffany and Michelle. A lot of the last cap content was developed with their recommendation, and there will be developers and builders that will be involved in the town hall meeting coming up. The rest of it can take place through incentives, by incentivizing developers, and the upcoming rewrite of the incentive policy to make that a little better. The second item on your already being addressed is a city code study, the overview of results. That's been taken care of. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Michelle, and the rest of the team. There also will be additional opportunities to review and discuss in the future. And then the other one, the last one that's already being addressed is the educational presentations on policies in the code analysis project, also known as a CAP. The last CAP project is underway, and so is public outreach through, again, the town hall, and I'm sure there's going to be other opportunities. And I was wrong, there's actually another one, Housing Commission function. Staff is making sure that the commission is better informed of items that are relevant. You'll notice that every other week I send out the council working calendar, and I've been highlighting topics that are relevant to housing. So not only am I highlighting them and sending them your way, I'm also making sure that there isn't a topic that maybe we got forgotten. So yeah. And then moving on to items that will be addressed in the future or in a future meeting. There was a request from commissioners to identify sales tax funding to City of Flagstaff from vacation rentals. This is actually part of a strategy in the 10-year housing plan. We would like to create a housing fund, so that research is underway. But just as a heads up, it may require council direction or voter buy-in. So once that is ready to come to you, it will. State and federal outlooks, we have that coordination in the works with the city manager's office as they do that regularly, so that we can get an update and perhaps bring it in November. Another one that we're working on is the next steps on the last. In the fall of this year, housing will bring forward a discussion item to discuss those city-owned affordable housing parcels. And moving on to the incentive policy for affordable housing. This was a request that will be taken care of through the last CAP project, and after that is complete, then we will address this. Light tech projects inventory with the dates is what the actual request was, and it was basically a request to have LIHTC units in Flagstaff go on a list with an expiration date so that we understand when they're expiring and can do something about it if possible at the time. Staff already have a list. We will update the list and bring it forward to the commission with a LIHTC 101 presentation in the future. On to the next one. The next one and then the last one, we had 2 recommendations. Not all of these scored high, but we wanted to make sure that we could address them if we could. The presentations from other commissioners to talk about their areas of expertise and to have various organizations around the city come and give presentations about the resources that they can provide. So the commission is well educated and can provide those out in the community. Those 2, when the agenda is quote unquote light, we will be scheduling those so that we can continue these conversations. There was another one, regular development updates as info for commission as progress toward housing plan goals. This is going to be taken care of because there's already a list that housing maintains, and we will share development progress through the housing section updates at the end of each agenda when there is a significant update to report on. And then lastly, we have 2 items that were outside of the Housing Commission's purview. I know this was one of the high scoring hot topic, the conflict between council's housing emergency and the P&Z Commission. While we would love to be able to do something about it, this is outside of the Housing Commission's purview, so this will have to be handled in the future by staff internally if it comes to it. And then the last one, housing to be raised as a division. I love that was recommended because it speaks highly of the work that we do as a commission. Again, it's outside of the Housing Commission's purview. And that's it. We really didn't have a ton of agenda items. Are there any questions or comments? Karen?
Yes, I have a few. So as far as that town hall, what does that look like? How are builders included in it, invited to it, et cetera?
That's a great question, which I cannot answer, but I'm happy to get back to
I
you.
can.
Okay, Sarah Dar can answer the question.
Actually moving away from town hall terminology. We had a meeting last night from 5 to 7 last night on this one, so it's maybe fresh in my head. We are moving away from the town hall terminology, given how it's being used in media, and we're really working on having a community conversation rather than like a town hall type format. I can't answer all the questions because we're still designing it, but there will be an opportunity for housing commissioners and sustainability commissioners, et cetera, to participate, and not to participate by sitting and listening, but to participate by providing specific feedback. And it's meant to be a give and take discussion with folks so that our goal is, of course, and not or, and identifying the places where or may be necessary, and figuring out how to prioritize items to answer overall community needs when or is required, when we have to place one over the other. And so we're looking at inviting not only commissions, but community organizations, community members, developers, builders, et cetera, to participate in that, as well as city staff. It will be professionally facilitated so that it's not coming from staff, it's coming from a facilitator. And I say the date is June 13th. So it's under development and information will be coming.
So with however it's set up, is that going to be an ability for builders and developers to share their experiences and frustrations and wishes and hopes? And
That is part of what took place at the beginning of the CAP project. So there were interviews conducted, there was a significant outreach to builders and developers in the community, both local and those who come from out of town, to share those frustrations, et cetera. So that is the foundation of CAP project. Do you want to add anything since this is yours?
No, that's where all of our barriers came from, the barriers that we are working through, those were pre-identified. So we limited that initial outreach specifically to those working in the field, or producing the housing stock.
I mean, just some feedback that I've gotten from several builders I've talked to recently is they were not asked, didn't participate in anything yet. And so they're frustrated, feeling like the last cap piece is happening without any feedback from them. And so that's why I was asking, because I want to make sure that they have a voice in this.
And a big part of what we're doing is trying to reach out and get that feedback. So if there's somebody we've missed in that conversation in terms of folks providing that housing stock, I mean, we need them to come forward and reach out to us.
Or if you're willing to offline,
Yeah.
not maybe publicly share names, et cetera, we'd be happy to reach out.
Yeah.
Especially smaller local builders.
Yeah.
And they're not all small that
Oh, okay.
I'm referring to. So it's both. But yeah, I'm happy to share that offline and make sure that maybe
That'd be great.
they weren't aware, who knows?
We can also go back to what the original list looked like. We had at one point in time stormed quite a substantial list up here.
We've looked at records of building permits and rezoning requests, et cetera, in the community and built the list off of those active in the community. So if we miss somebody, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
If we miss, and we also brainstormed outside that list too, like I don't see.
Right.
So if we miss somebody, we're happy to have that conversation.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And then my next question is the stuff that's out of our commission purview, where's that definition come from as it's outside of our purview? Is that part of how our commission was set up?
It comes directly from city code. And while the way it was worded by the commission was conflict between the emergency and P and Z commission, it's not something the commission can work on. It is something that staff has started having conversations with planning and zoning staff members. Not planning and zoning staff members, what am I thinking? Commission liaison, about how, what is inherent in the conflict, what is conflict, what is perceived conflict. Of course, the powers by each body are very different. Planning and zoning has decision-making capacity. Housing Commission is an advisory body. And so looking at how we can overcome any actual conflict or perception of conflict between decisions made by the two bodies is something that we as staff can work on, but it is not something that we can necessarily receive Housing Commission direction to do. But it is something that we can take under an advisement and as we have those conversations. And I've already started those. Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. It was something she called on you first, not me. That was something I was going to add as we got in there. So thank you.
Have anything else, Sarah, you want to add or the same thing essentially that Karen was going to ask?
It was the outside of the commission's purview and why.
Okay. Does any other commissioner have questions for Adriana on this topic? We online? Oh, Ross has his fee. Was that in the last topic?
It was in the last topic.
Okay, sorry. Day late, dollar short. Okay, and then do I need to call for public comment on this topic? You're remembering things. Okay, is there any public comments on this topic from anyone in the room that's public or anyone online? Okay, sorry, you're the only public.
I'm just here for an education, see how things work.
I just want to make sure you have an.
Don't worry, we'll look at you for the next two items too, because it just, that's what it is, yeah.
Too bad to look at.
Excellent.
I can do it.
All right, so then moving on to our next agenda item is 7B, which is a discussion of draft adaptive reuse bond program. This is discussion only, and I'm turning it over to Jennifer. Right.
Yay. We got our wait, never mind. We did the technology practice run earlier today. It's much better than last month. Is that good for everybody online? I've lost my view of the Teams meeting on this screen because it's in presenter mode. So just let me know if there's
I can
comments.
see it.
Okay,
I got you.
hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Michelson. I'm the Housing Planning Manager with the Housing Office. I'm here today to talk to you about the proposed adaptive reuse bond program, which is our third. Just the third bond program we have in the works. I know the RED program is also in the works. This one is the next one off the next furthest along. So, which is exciting. So the purpose of today's presentation is to get feedback from this commission on that draft adaptive reuse bond program. And I did, just in case anybody wasn't aware, I did attach a draft of the program. It's very short. I'm very proud of how concise it is. So if you had that printed, you can kind of refer to that as we discuss today. And just a heads up, we have 1 hour to delve into this agenda topic as well as Tiffany's. And they are combined together. So we're just going to try to shoot for 30 minutes for each, I think, or less than, so that you guys have time to finish up the meeting. But anyway, so with each new bond program, we like to give you a little bit of background and context about where this funding comes from and how it was intended to be used. So this $20 million housing bond, Prop 442, was approved by Flagstaff voters in November 2022. This $20 million bond identified 4 different spending categories. Like I said, we've had 2 of the programs in the works. RAD is close behind, and it leaves this last adaptive reuse bond program that we're focusing on. And the purpose of this program was to repurpose existing buildings into rental units. And $3 million was allocated for this activity. Commission's role in the creation of these bond programs. We'll incorporate your guys' recommendations into these program details. Get your recommendations about how the funding is allocated, just like we did last month already with the rental incentive bond program awards. We had you guys weigh in on those, make a recommendation prior to City Council, who has the final decision-making authority. That is all per the founding ordinance. I'm not sure what word he used for the commission. So, right. And so as far as the intent or purpose for this funding, we really do rely on, as staff, we rely on the approved ballot language and the voter information pamphlet to guide the creation of these bond funded programs. And so each of those 4 spending categories from the prior slide included a brief paragraph to illustrate the intent of the funding. And this is how the adaptive reuse funding was described in that voter informational pamphlet. I've just copy and pasted it here. I don't know if, I don't want to read the whole thing, but a lot of the intent behind this program was born out of the issue of empty commercial spaces on the bottom floors of commercial or mixed use buildings in Flagstaff. I think at the time that was a big concern. I do believe it's become a little bit less of a problem. But so since that has kind of receded as like a forefront issue, I think the more common reuse, the more common example of adaptive reuse is the motel conversions we've seen. Of course, we have 3 examples of that type of a project occurring in town with the potential for more, of course, given the number of old motels we have in town. So, but that is certainly, this funding is not exclusive to that type. Just want to make that clear right off the bat. So we can cover eligibility in a couple slides. That's sort of the mind frame we went into. This is just how we've gone about developing this program. It started back in last fall with a round of research and stakeholder interviews. Initially, I just took a look at just to make sure to see what examples we had locally or statewide of adaptive reuse. There were several examples in the Valley and in Tucson of mostly motel conversions. And oftentimes you'll see the cities have acquired properties themselves, and then they partner with nonprofits to operate those facilities. So we're still, as usual, kind of the leaders kind of carving a path forward with the use of a general obligation bond funding for a type of activity like this. So it's a little different, different dynamic, and we're really always very dependent and relying on partnerships with our development community to really get these projects off the ground. So we had some cool examples, just looking at what we could and could not do. We do have within City Hall, we know we have sustainability and economic vitality have some interesting incentive and grant programs that we took a look at, just to see how those funds were awarded for, they're kind of smaller projects. We liked them because they seemed low key and simple and not complex in the way the funding is awarded. But we quickly found that the key difference is the term grant. I think with this bond funding, we don't want to get into that territory of just cutting a check. It's we're erring on the side of make it a loan, and then we can look into forgiveness options. So it's a little too much. I can get into that more later, but yes, so we interviewed different city staff, Flagstaff Shelter Services, Housing Solutions, Catholic Charities, people who've actually done this kind of work. And that allowed us to around Thanksgiving, we had a program drafted. We just wanted to get something on paper. And at that point, we really quickly realized the need to coordinate with planning on code that would really facilitate this program. Not only the program, even if we didn't have money available, we just think it's a good thing. It's a good innovative practice to be able to streamline the zoning process for adaptive reuse projects in town. So that prompted our collaboration with Tiffany on the zoning code amendment proposals that she has. That's the next item. So we will be discussing the program details first, but just know that a lot of the program details were heavily influenced by the work that Tiffany will be doing in tandem. So she has two, I guess they're considered two zoning code text amendments, or are they just one? Just one. Just one, but they're dealing with this idea of allowing 100% affordable residential use in a commercial zone. Typically, there's an additional condition, like a conditional use permit that's required. It's just an extra kind of zoning loop people have to jump through. So she's going to help streamline with that code provision, and as well as an adaptive reuse provision that includes additional incentives. We realized how we could do some really, really helpful work there. So she will elaborate more on those details with her code. But yeah, in order to finalize the program, we're going to have to incorporate. So yeah, we're here obviously in the spring area. And we looking forward into this summer, I do believe we'll have to incorporate feedback on both this program and the draft code amendments, get the program in alignment with the code, bring it back to you guys to see what the final looks like. And then just so you're aware, there are different approval processes for Tiffany's code and this program. It is nice. We have a little shorter approval process than she has. So. Yes. So during the interviews, I was hearing two different perspectives as far as like, what are our priorities for this funding? I think this summarizes it pretty well. I heard that we wanted to, continue support for transitional housing needs in our community. By providing the housing stability for those coming out of emergency shelter, and additionally longer-term rental supply that's affordable to local workforce is also needed. So we're spanning a pretty wide spectrum of housing need, and that is inclusive of workforce. So we also really knew we wanted these funds to be used to assist with property acquisition, which was with the rental incentive bond program, we specifically prohibited the funds from being used for that purpose. So that's a pretty marked difference here with this program. We know half the battle with, by definition, adaptive reuse, you need to have an existing building. And so if you see one, you need help acquiring it. So we wanted to prioritize that as an eligible use of funding. Let me see what else we have. We have, yes, also as a deviation from the rental incentive bond program, we wanted this application process to be non-competitive, to not do the formalized NOFA, to kind of treat it more along the lines of our incentive policy for affordable housing, where we know we have this pot of money. And we know if you have a project in the works with the city and it checks all the boxes and you meet all the requirements, you are eligible for that money. It's not like a competition. It's not like you don't get ranked. So we really wanted to kind of run with that idea of if you are checking off all the boxes for this adaptive reuse project, then you are eligible for the funds. And then that leads us to how much you're awarded to how much. So we really wanted to award these funds on a per unit cost basis in order to help us meet our 75 unit goal. It's becoming harder and harder. The longer we get from when this bond was originally discussed and developed, the more and more construction costs, the harder it is to meet those prior unit counts. We really saw that with the rental incentive bond program. So we're shooting for a 75 unit goal. So essentially what we did was we have the $3 million available for this program. 3 million divided by 75 units is about $40,000 per. So that is the limit on the funding request. So if you're doing a smaller project, 40,000 times however many units. So there's proportion there. And we're also, given, we have limited funding, it's, $3 million doesn't really sound like that much these days anymore. So wherever we can with this bond funding, we're looking to leverage. So we want to see people coming in with additional funding sources, because you're not going to be able to finish a project, acquire and renovate and everything with just the 40 grand per unit. So we need to see that leveraged funds. And the last priority for the funding was we wanted to remove zoning uncertainty. Mentioned we want to ensure that proposed residential uses are permitted by right, and that's why Lee is doing her code amendments. So I'm going to get into the 3 categories of the project requirements that would need to be met in order to be considered eligible. We have 3 categories are project details. There's lots of little different criteria. It'll take the next few slides. We'll walk through the cost per unit, which I already mentioned was the 40,000, and then the evidence of leveraged funding. So in project details, we want to see how the property you've selected is eligible. It of course needs to be located within the Flagstaff city limits, since this is a city general obligation bond. And you need to just provide either proof that you own the buildings, a contingent purchase contract, or a lease agreement for the proposed use for the minimum 30-year period. I'm not sure how likely that situation is, but we wanted to allow for it. And then also the documentation that your proposed use is permitted within the underlying zoning district for the Flagstaff zoning code. And that will be easy to just essentially photocopy if we get those codes approved and effective. Next slide is what are eligible and ineligible uses. So eligible, we've got, all costs relating to acquisition and rehab of existing buildings for 100% affordable new rental housing. That includes, just to literally list it out, we've got purchase, renovation, preservation, rehab, and infrastructure upgrades as needed. And ineligible uses for the program funds are, we are not going to permit the construction of new freestanding buildings on the property, complete demolition of buildings, renovation of existing housing units, which was a tricky one that we just caught the other day, or the improvement of completely undeveloped vacant land. So pretty black and white there. Continuing with the project details that we need to check off the affordability period in line with the zoning code and the prior bond program we had where the minimum amount is 30 years. And the AMI that we landed on was that units must serve households at an average of 80% AMI or less, with the max household income limit of 100% AMI. That is in keeping with our current code provisions for affordable housing right now. And we'll really get into that AMI discussion as well with Tiffany because these are linked like that. So any changes here would need to be reflected in Tiffany's. So and the rent methodology, we're fine with whatever any provider wants to, if they have, most likely people are going to have these affordable rent requirements from other funding sources. But if there's an absence of that requirement, you are, this was where we started thinking about if you're an employer in town and you want to, buy some sort of building to house your servers or a bartender or your staff that you employ, they are most likely not aware of how to do affordable rent. So we would have them use our local affordable rent income and rent limits. So the next two project requirements are that cost per unit limit, where if you gotta come in at that $40,000 per unit mark. Anything over $40,000 per unit is automatically ineligible for funding. And then this evidence of other funding sources we want to see provide all other funding, the stack of funding you're compiling to complete the purchase or rehab. And we'll be evaluating that for viability. I think that's the one kind of flexible gray area in this program where we need, if you submit that you have a $10,000 in a grant from some entity, and then you're going in for $1 million with us and you're trying to buy something really expensive. I don't know if that's, we're gonna have to see that all adds up. So yeah, all funding sources need to be, you need to provide letters of commitment from all secured and pending. The application process, this is where we're really deviating from our last program. So it would be available on a first come first served basis until all the program funds are awarded. And applications are just going to be reviewed for eligibility by housing staff. You just a reminder, just to make it really clear, you have to pass all program requirements to receive an award, and we would notify you within 30 days of your application date of your eligibility for that funding. So the loan, I have two slides that just run through all of the loan terms. Again, since we essentially kind of copy and pasted this from our last program, really similar terms here. We'd secure a loan against the property promissory note, recorded deed of trust, subordinate to first mortgage financing or other with other subordination considered on a case by case. This is a no interest loan. No payments are required for the 30-year term. The loan term would begin once council approves. So the application process is streamlined. You'd know that you get the funding faster, but we still have to develop a loan contract. So there is that kind of time consideration that we have to factor in the work to get the loan drafted and approved by council. So that is the one kind of time consideration with this program. So that term would begin with council approval. Units need to be available, renovated and online, ready for lease within 2 years of the award. And the compliance period of 30 years would begin at certificate of occupancy. That was another catch. We realized if you just need this funding to acquire the property and you have no idea how much, you're going to have to go do some research to figure out how much it'll cost to renovate, how long it'll take. We won't start that 3-year clock until those units are ready. We'll just take some coordination with staff. And it kind of deserves its own bullet, I guess, but the 30-year loan would be forgiven after the 30-year term. We were thinking that was justifiable considering this is going to have to be 100% affordable units. It's not just 10. So our last program, the minimum required was just 10%. So the loan terms we asked for repayment after that 30-year term, not so with it. Yeah, if the units aren't delivered in accordance with the terms, do a payable immediately. The loan has to be assumed if the property is sold, and the new owner has to honor the original contract and re-sign new docs. I think this might be a repeat. The units need to be available for lease within 24 months. All right. There's some redundant. So I want to just show that we have 4 really critical key questions for you guys to discuss today. That I want to, we need to get to and hear you. But I have 2 other slides. I just want to talk about next steps before we spend most of our time on this. So what's happening next? Tiffany has her zoning code amendment process, and I just wanted you guys to be aware of all that entails. So she's here today to start her feedback with you guys, the Housing Commission. She will have to go, I mean, perhaps she would have to come back later. I'm not really sure. We were thinking this would be a good start, but she knows, she'll have to go 2 rounds with the Planning and Zoning Commission and 2 rounds with City Council as well. So it becomes hard to put specific dates on all of this. All I know is we will have to follow her lead with that process, and let that all play out. But the next steps for this program is that staff will be able to hear your feedback today, draft revisions to the plan to reflect your feedback today. We'll wait for the adaptive reuse code amendment approval process to ensure that our draft program aligns with her final code language. And then we'll come back to the commission in the future with a final bond program for you to hopefully recommend approval. So let me jump back to the 4 questions we had. First question, I really wanted to hear everybody's thoughts on the AMI requirements, where we would average average 80% and allow a max income of 100% AMI. You can always obviously serve lower AMI levels if that is part of your funding requirement. Is that meeting your community needs? For any questions or comments? Karen?
Commissioner Flores?
Do we know what our community AMI needs are? I mean, it's kind of hard to answer that question when I have no idea if our average person is exceeding 100% AMI and what those needs are. Do we have any data on that?
Well, we don't have like current surveyed, we have census.
Area median income is published on an annual basis and is literally the median income as well. Hypothetically, it's literally the median income of the area if HUD didn't monkey with artificial caps. And so it is reflective of our population with it being a middle place mark. With the exception that we are a high cost exception area, so it's a little bit higher than the actual median, but then it's lower because our median income went up more than the national median income went up, and HUD has an artificial cap that if the income, I know more detail than you wanted, but this is why I can't just say yes. It's because if your area median income goes up more than the average of the national median income, they cap you at that national average. And because our minimum wage has climbed at the rate that it has, we now are subject to the artificial cap. And so I think based on your question, a different way we could word this is along the lines of serving those households above 80% AMI, which is the low income mark for programs where there is other funding available. Being able to stretch up beyond that is 100% enough. We could do a number of different things. We could make the average 90% so that we're serving households above that 80% mark. This one's really a feedback piece. It's a temperature taking. You can see we don't have it fully baked. You said come earlier, here we are. And so what does that look like? Are we interested in serving lower income households only, or allowing that mark to go up above so that we're reaching into workforce with some of these bond funds. Remember that these are ceilings, they are not floors. So if somebody, even no matter what we publish, if somebody is awarded funding that is serving those transitioning out of homelessness or not, it doesn't prevent them from doing it. It just caps the income of folks that are able to live in the units this money may help provide. Is that maybe as clear as mud? Okay.
Yeah, that's why I'm just thinking in my mind is that we are still missing people that will be above that 100% AMI that need this help, but can't get it.
The trick,
Go ahead.
well, I just was, and I don't know exactly how big of an issue or barrier this is, but we don't really have a policy to address rental income limits over the 100% AMI mark. So our IPA identifies a target, an AMI limit for affordable rental and ownership properties. So we would be, anything over 100 we would be exceeding the incentive policy. I don't know if that's
But the incentive policy was written how many years ago?
right and needs to be updated anyhow.
Right, so I don't
So this
think
could-
referencing a policy that's out of date and isn't useful is necessarily the mark we want to hit.
We don't have any other current programming or examples of affordable rental units offered beyond the 100% AMI mark. Just what I'm trying.
If it's a helpful data point, the HUD AMI for a household of two, 100% is about 80,000 and 80% is 64,000. As far as the AMI question, so to me, the only danger of lowering the AMI for the program is that there may be a point where it's too low and then you don't get applicants. So my thought process is that you want it as low as you can get it while still getting applicants for the full pool of funds. I have no clue what that limit is, but that would be my thinking if I had data and I was trying to set a limit.
Well, you could kind of flip it on its head and just implement a max. So anything below the max AMI is all good.
Yeah. But if you kind of wanted to force them to serve lower income populations.
What I'm understanding is we would probably want to consider a slightly higher AMI.
Yeah, so the thought process is that the current AMI is actually too low and we won't get enough applicants for the full pool of funds.
Or that the need is above,
The need is above.
not looking at who's gonna apply, but who do we want to serve? And so if tax credit units can serve at this percentage or whatever, where's that gap?
The intent pieces with bond funding was to be able to address items in areas where there wasn't other funding available. And so this was a careful conversation of, let's get the commission's feedback and see where they are. Is it, we want to go lower with money or do we want to go higher? I do want to acknowledge that that was part of the original bond conversation was serving incomes higher.
Then what other programs can serve?
Then because there isn't funding available typically to serve incomes over 80% from any other source.
Adriana, do you have someone online?
Yep, Commissioner Milazzo has a comment.
Commissioner, yeah, go ahead.
So I lean towards raising the max to 125% AMI, considering the number of housing burdened households we have in our community. And I think the Housing Solutions reports are really helpful in understanding those numbers a little bit better. Thank you.
Thanks, Moses. Karen, do you have additional comments?
Yeah, because one of the comments you all made was, yes, we have a higher minimum wage, and so, yeah, technically we have higher incomes, but with all the studies that have been done, everything has gone up in price. So people, even though they may have the income that can meet these requirements, they don't have the money for their housing. Because everything is more expensive.
Interestingly, the places with the highest incomes also have the highest housing costs, and high incomes are typically eaten away by high housing costs.
And so I have a clarification question. One has to do with, so the city is proposing to set AMI requirements, but did I also hear you were gonna set corresponding rent limits too?
The rent charged at the property, we would defer to your other funding sources. So if the applicant already has other grants or awards from the state or whoever that require certain income limits to be served for a certain period of time, then of course, defer to that. But once that expires or in the absence of any of those other funding restrictions, we would have them use our affordable rent limit.
Those rent limits would be redone, adjusted to the AMI that is intended to serve.
So I guess my question is, assuming there isn't another funding source that dictates the rent limits, or you're above whatever it is, like, let's say it's 80% rents, LIHTC doesn't have those, right? So I'm guessing you would use Novogradac to come up with the rent limits for 80% AMI at these unit sizes.
We use a methodology similar to Novogradac's based on legal advice.
So what I was getting at is if you do that calculation and then you look at what data we have about what market is at those limits, if we're hitting below that, but we're at 90% AMI, then it feels like we're meeting a need that the market's not serving. But if we do the calculation at 90% AMI and we find that that rent limit is well above whatever the average rent is, then I think that could help you identify what AMI, based on what rent, is not being met by the market. Is that a reasonable methodology?
I believe we're on the same.
I don't know that I followed what you said. Sorry.
No, sorry. I did. Okay.
Okay, it's on the same page.
Okay. And has that been done to get to this 80% or not yet? Because if the sense is 90% should be the average, have you guys done the math already to know that that's already being served by the market?
Have utilized the Novogradac methodology to back into rents above 60%. So yes,
And 80% is the number that's not being hit by the market, not something higher.
depending on the target audience or target population you're serve, yes. So the rents that we publish use the Novogradac methodology to carry that up into the upper AMI numbers, not addressed by home rents or LIHTC rents.
Okay. I wonder if our gut is not right or it is right. Like, so if
Well, let's get your feedback and get your gut, and then we can.
and then run the numbers.
Yeah.
That would be my question. Is an average of 90% AMI hitting below what the would be for a market rate?
Okay, I
Yeah.
think I see your question now.
Yeah, what's affordable to 90% AMI at this household size and this unit size is not being served by the market already?
So if the desire is to go up, then let's do that, and we can do with what that looks like.
I also have a question. If we want to do we have to average, or does everybody like the idea of an average?
I absolutely do.
For tax. Okay. Make sure.
So in looking at workforce housing, I feel like you can meet the needs of the workforce if you can average. You can have some lower and some higher, but if you set a max AMI like LIHTC does, then you're only serving your definition of low income, as opposed to being more broad and serving essential workers or employers who might participate in this kind of a program. If you have, like, if you can hit someone at 100% AMI or 110% AMI and then offset it with someone at 70% AMI, you've got more mixed income housing in your development. That's my 2 cents. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, what she said.
Tyler.
Oh, I just wanted, add that I also like the average approach. I think it gives more flexibility and to help staff trying to synthesize all the feedback. My earlier comment was in support of lowering the AMI potentially, but the comments about how that may be duplicative of other funds that are already existing for lower AMI made a lot of sense to me. So I also stand and support the position for going higher.
Is there anyone online, any commissioners online who have comments or questions?
Anybody have their hand raised?
I have a comment. I think I'm in agreement. This is Eric. I'm just running numbers through my head. I mean, Karen can vouch for this, but, average median house is 690 in Flagstaff. If you look at a loan amount for that, or a monthly payment for that, is probably close to 4,000 a month. And to get a loan, you have to have what, 40% debt to income. So I mean, a household's has to make about $8,000 a month if I'm doing my math, just roughly speaking. I mean, we're over, we're in that 90,000 bracket. So I think it's imperative that we raise it.
Thank you, Commissioner Brownfield. Any other comment? I have a couple, but I want to open it up if anyone else. Okay, so I have a question about the 100% affordable. Oh, does somebody have a thing?
Yes, Moses said, I like the Devana approach of using average with a higher than 100% AMI max. And then just a reminder that we have one more item after this one.
Yeah, sorry. I think this is fast, but I'm wondering about the 100% affordable requirement. And if that's necessary or preferred by you all. If it's a max per unit, then I think that could limit what the development is getting. And if there were 5 or 6 or 7 market rate units in there, would we care?
I think that's a great discussion question. I think our intention, at least going into this initial draft, is just to try to be as aggressive as possible, get as many affordable units out there with this bond funding as we can. If we set that bar up there, I think there was also this thinking that there was a lot of money. There has been a lot of money out there to support projects like this in the last couple of years. It may be kind of drying up. I don't know that it's really going to always be there, in which case a mixed income project would maybe make more sense. I think last year we were kind of thinking that so much of the funding out there already requires 100% affordable. Ours wouldn't be want to conflict with that, and of course we also wanted to try to meet our targets with actual affordable units in and not additional market rate. So, but you're right. I think there would have to be a distinction where the bond funds are only being used for the provision of the affordable units. So yeah, I think if you guys are interested,
It could be 100% affordable as supported by one funds.
Right, yeah, your 40,000 per unit doesn't count non-affordable units, but if the math is, 80 units and you only need 75 in bond funds, then can those other 5 in the one project be market rate? Because it's 40,000 times 75, you hit your metrics.
I think if there's interest in doing that, we can. We just have to make sure that the code also idea gets transferred over to the code too, so.
So that was one question. The other question was if somebody's ever over 100% AMI, then the project needs to repay funds. And so I worry about this at recertification or lease renewal. And I don't even think that our housing authority has a policy that says if you're over income at recert, you get kicked out or you're no longer eligible. So I wonder if there could be some language about eligibility at recertification for over whatever the max limit is.
The housing authority doesn't function on independent policies, but federal regulation. So there are adjustments made if household reaches over target. It depends on the programs or voucher programs. The household is essentially weaned off. There is a time period depending on the amount of income over the max, but it does have a end date. Within public housing, moving because it's a housing unit is not required, but the unit slowly transitions to market rate rent, which we could look at as well. I agree, it doesn't make sense to necessarily require households to move even in a strict school transitional housing type.
And I would be fine with like a year's grace period, but we're doing income certs typically 60 days out and now you're over income and I'm sorry, you have to find another place in 30 days is super harsh. And so if there could be some softening of that max language, because if somebody recertifies over 100% AMI and now we have to repay, whoever it is has to repay $1 million loan
For sure.
for one household that's over on recert, that's untenable.
Thank you for that clarification. That was never the intent.
Yeah. I didn't think you guys were that like, but still, like, I was like, oh, compliance is a thing and you don't wanna be in trouble. So, yeah.
Agreed.
And then, my last question on this is timeline. So, I understand the goal of making sure any zoning change is consistent with a bond-funded incentive program. But are there properties that could take advantage of bond funds that would not need a zoning code amendment in order to be eligible for these funds? So I guess they have to be coupled for the timeline, or can this move faster? Because it doesn't have to go to planning and zoning twice. It doesn't have to go to council twice. It doesn't have to do all the things that Tiffany gets to do.
Chair, if I could be so bold as to ask us to go through these so that we can get the feedback that we need.
Yep.
For the questions, and then the rest of the commission, I don't think knows the pieces of the zoning changes, so if we could then couple that and then go back to that, if that would be okay.
Yeah, you're fine, sorry.
Yeah, no apology necessary, of course, just we can get this feedback, we can keep this program moving, which may be the basis of keeping it going separate from together.
What does everybody feel about forgiveness after 30 years?
Sorry, I'm looking at, oh, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner
I
Cullen.
think that kind of goes in line with the other programs that we had already established.
Yeah, so with the rental incentive, we allowed forgiveness if they gave us 20 extra years for that 50-year affordability. But they only had the minimum threshold of 10% affordable to meet. So I just wanted to make sure everybody felt okay with that forgiveness at that period of time.
I'm not seeing anyone jumping up and down here. Is there anyone online who has a comment?
Nobody online.
Okay, so general support of the 30 years. Okay. And then number 3 is the commission supportive of a non-competitive first come, first served application process similar to incentive.
Get behind this is that $3 million isn't enough to initiate a project.
I mean, yes.
It's enough to help a project should one come forward, and so publishing a competitive RFP makes sense for this one.
And the quicker, the better.
And the quicker the better. And staff originally had a 10-day turn time on an answer from application. And I said, need to introduce the human factor. Let's say somebody's on vacation. And so the 30 days was put in order to speed faster if we can, but I didn't want a commitment we couldn't realistically meet if someone was absent.
All right, so that's good. And then 4th, what threshold is the commission comfortable with for project eligibility in regard to committed versus pending funding?
So we struggled here because they are public dollars and we wanted to make sure that the project is viable. And if we're going to award funds, and let's say it's for acquisition, how real is the rehabilitation? If they already acquired the property and the rehabilitation is $50 million and they're asking for 3, but don't have any of the other 37 necessary, how does that work? How do we assure that the public funding being awarded is going to a project that is viable? Of course, it can be repaid, but if the project is moving and someone goes bankrupt or doesn't move forward, then we're in court trying to recapture those dollars. And so it was important to be able to balance using the money for acquisition. Jen and I spent a lot of time maybe beating our head on the wall on this one of like, what's the best way to determine project viability without making sure everybody has everything in place before we come in with funding, while also respecting the fact that these are taxpayer dollars and we are to be stewards of them and not something at great risk. And so that's why this question is up here.
Commissioner Kellogg?
I think it would really depend on the pending and what status. There's a lot of different ways to be pending. Is it contingent on another like another component for that funding to become available? Do you have to get funding from this place for that pending to be, like if one little piece falls out of that equation, will that pending funding no longer be acquirable?
That's why our brains went in the direction of percentage. If they can show 75% of the funding or 50% of the funding is in place and the rest is pending or unidentified, like where's the comfort level with, am I reflecting our conversation fairly?
I would say unidentified would have to be an absolute no. I mean, that's-
Unidentified, okay, would be.
I think, again, depending on what that pending funding is it just a matter of, okay, once we attain this bond, it'll be approved? Is it, like, well, you would know better. It's like, is it a matter of documentation? Like, at this point in time, it's pending until we receive this, but it's not contingent upon, let's say, finding another source, unidentified or whatever. Because if that funding is pending on an unidentified source, it's all gonna fall
We
apart.
don't want any contingent award. We just want to see that you've got your.
Well, for me, pending is contingent.
I would agree, because like if you're not, your loan isn't locked at a rate, you have a letter from the bank saying, here's how we would underwrite it today, but you're not gonna be done for your takeout financing for 6 months. You gotta give them credit for that, because that's the best they're ever gonna get. Like, you're not gonna get your rate, lock, everything until you're ready to close. But you have it identified. It's not unknown. So I think, is that reasonable to say, like, if you have a commitment of financing that you can't finalize until you get closer to closing, that's okay, but you can't say, we think we're gonna get $1 million from somebody
As
someday.
long as we get this over here.
Yeah.
So that's
We're
the,
not gonna be able to close on this unless this happens over here. But if it's just pending on
Haley, what?
a completion or something, a timeline or something like that.
so let me throw a wrench in it,
About,
Okay.
because this
what
is
about a
close to what-
signed term sheet?
Uh-huh.
Like,
Assigned
if you're
term
going out to get a loan, you'd have you'd have a, like signed term sheet. That's, the loan's not closed. But you'd have a loan application or you'd have a term sheet that you would have signed that would prove that it's not unidentified.
Right. It's just probably not finalized because you're not gonna lock your rate till you're closer.
I don't know. I mean, like, for example, I have a loan closing on 6/2 for, actually a property here in town, and we rate locked yesterday. So
Nice.
I don't know. It just depends, but it would lay out the terms, the general terms and commitment of the lender. And it should say something like, the base rate is this, and then it's based on, some market indices. So there should at least be some sort of descriptor.
That's the desire of the commission. Let us work with folks in the field, commission specifically, to pin down language of what is acceptable and what isn't. We got close to where you are now, and then we said, what if the money is acquisition? Are we going to also require all of the rehabilitation funding to be in place before we award for acquisition? Or are we comfortable awarding for acquisition, knowing that we're putting them on the hook to do the rehabilitation or pay the money back? And that felt like a greater risk to us as staff, which is again why we're here asking for, what are your thoughts professionally and as community members?
Is there feedback on that scenario where these funds would be used for acquisition and funds for rehab aren't identified yet?
But what if they acquire it and can't rehab it?
Right, and that's why we're here early with hard questions.
Moses has a comment online.
Moses, you want to go ahead?
That I think the city shouldn't fund a project if there isn't a demonstrated likely path to occupancy.
Karen, I know you had your hand up.
Well, my thought was kind of back on one of the other slides where you talked about if they didn't build the place in 24 months, that everything was due and payable immediately. Couldn't you put a time frame on it to say, okay, these funds would have to be paid back in a certain time frame if
We can. we can,
They can't pay it back.
it's a greater risk of
Yeah.
somebody going under and hotel sitting vacant. It's under construction, but it's not done. And we do not, let me be clear, we do not have money in that hotel. So I'm using it as an example, only as an example, but it's sitting there. Would we?
Town suites.
Yeah, like how to, are there mechanisms? Absolutely are there mechanisms. Is there a level of tolerance of that type of risk for use of these bond funds is what we're hoping to use our brain trust here to do.
Or could the city take possession?
Or could the city take possession?
Then
That
it
brings
becomes
me
city
to
property and we figure.
Another question I had on a few slides back, and I didn't want to derail the conversation. But as a, in second lien position, if that builder were to default, you're not gonna get your money back.
Are you aware of other financing sources that are going to allow a municipality to be in first lien position? And so that, I
That's
know,
why I didn't bring it up on the last slide. I just like, just a contingency plan there that,
yeah.
are you willing to be that vulnerable as far as?
Typically we have, we sit in second position or third position, quite frequently with when the funding source, other funding sources require us to be subordinate primary mortgages. There are some federal funding sources that require dominance over local funding, that type of thing, and we generally have been in this. This to us felt somewhat different, because it is a higher risk situation, and so we wanted to know what that tolerance is. I don't think there's any situation where we're going into rental incentive bond program feels a bit different because things are pretty baked and we don't allow acquisition. This one is acquisition, rehabilitation, adaptive reuse. So our risk is different. So we've been working on what is the tolerance for that risk, knowing that $3 million is not enough to spur its own project. It's going to be a piece of funding, and how can we best be stewards of those dollars while also doing what we intended? And when I say we, I mean the community is the creativity and creating some funding that allows some different things to happen in our community as examples. Of course, when this was conceived of, the recommended funding amount was much higher than $3 million. That's what was ultimately whittled down to, given other needs and priorities by city council. And so the original concepts are no longer financially viable with $3 million. So that's the other spot that we as staff have kind of been, I don't want to say struggling in, but we keep kicking that ball and being like, okay, we can't always plan for the worst case scenario, but we definitely need to discuss it and know what that looks like. And so.
Julie has a comment. Question.
Yeah.
Could you fund in progress payments meeting milestones along the way?
Not for an acquisition, though.
Especially for like renovation costs.
So it feels like the acquisition with unknown rehab is a little less supported because of the higher risk.
About, this is not something we've discussed. I'm talking out loud. I'm talking out loud. I'm talking off the cuff. What if the funding for acquisition is not provided until the closing table, but there is a grace period between award without funding being transferred and
Only at close.
at closing, but the plan for rehab, we can do the award without the funding transfer. And then at closing table, there has to be a financing plan or funding identified to do the rehabilitation. That would let them say, I have 3 million towards acquisition. Make sure all of those ducks are in a row, line up the rehabilitation pieces before we hit the closing table. Is that silly? Does that timeline make sense?
Ms. Linder.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
think that
essentially
makes sense.
Sorry, was that Commissioner Zoroya?
It was.
Yes, it was.
Okay, so that, but then it'd be like a contingent award essentially. Like you've got it but you have this much time, whatever that time is, to get to
Close
closing
escrow.
and to identify the rest of the stack.
Does that feel, Jen?
How does this sorry, this is all like murky enough for me because I don't like live in this every day, but how does that work with what you just described with like a council approval? So council would approve the loan.
Similar to contingents of award of LIHTC. It's a show me the money award.
Okay, so council approves the amount. We draft the loan documents and the funding is not dispensed until close of escrow.
Yes.
When we have proof of rehab costs.
And we make that payment conditional on proof of rehabilitation, reasonable proof of rehabilitation, maybe even requiring a contingency so that it is real.
Does that mean if a project states that they know what their renovation costs are? No, maybe, I don't know.
I don't think there's ever going to be a way for us to know 100% because you're gonna.
I don't know.
So we use
buy a
escrow
hotel and there's
holdbacks a
gonna
lot.
be the parking lot.
If there is no.
I mean, stuff happens, don't get me wrong. We had a cavern. We'll tell you about it someday. It was great. But, so it feels like it could be used for rehab easy if you've already acquired. It feels like if you're turnkey purchasing something that has already been renovated, that would work. And then if you want to use it for acquisition, it'll be contingent on identification of reasonable rehab support to make the project relatively viable.
Okay.
Within 24 months, right? Like if you don't have your money yet, how are you going to have your rehab done in 24 months anyway?
Lee said we use escrow holdbacks a lot.
But I don't know if you could for acquisition, because you'd need it to buy
You,
it. and have
you
clear
couldn't
title.
for acquisition, but if you're and maybe I'm not following, but if you're, you know, talking about a payout later, you could. But if you're talking about, you know, if you're doing it concurrent with close of escrow, you're just gonna be like another loan statement. And if presumably if somebody else is making a loan to help complete the project, no one, you know, the larger lender, the first line lender is not going to make a loan without a clear business plan and path to success either.
Is that sufficient direction on risk tolerance?
I have one, I don't know, we really talked about this. It was kind of one, we were wondering earlier this week about the requirement, if there should be a requirement for a certain percentage of the project being secured. Like if you need to show that you prove that you've already secured funding for X amount.
I think the feedback from the commission, as I am understanding it, is that you need to show us 100% for either acquisition. If for acquisition, you need to show us 100% to be approved, pass, fail. Tell me if I've got this right. For acquisition, an applicant would need to show us 100% of financing in place, pass, fail. And then they would also need to show us before close of escrow, the funding that's in place for rehabilitation. And that is all reasonably
Committed, as my question was versus the pending funding, and you had mentioned unidentified. I think that should be a no.
unidentified is a no, but if someone, I've got an application into Federal Home Loan Bank.
But I mean, anything can happen before close of escrow. We all know that. So if they're reasonably, you know, they've got their commitments from the bank. I mean, if things blow up after that, and that is just a fact of life. But if they have a letter of commitment from a bank, even though it's not, you know, closed or whatever, but if they have that commitment that the bank is on board with it, but I think the unidentified funding should be that should not.
Is a pending unawarded grant application acceptable?
Yeah, I would think, as long as they have identified it.
That application's made, they're waiting for an award, and then if the award doesn't come through, then.
That stuff happens.
In a different spot.
But unidentified, I think, should not be a factor.
Excellent, thank you. And then for, they would need to show us the funding reasonably for the rehabilitation estimates prior to close. If the funding is for rehabilitation alone, rehabilitation only, then they need to show us a pro forma with funding sources identified to complete the project for us to transfer money. Yes?
Yes.
100%. I know that was hard, but that's what.
Yeah.
No, for. Thank you.
I think it's like
the terminology gets tricky.
Yes.
Difference between being cured or unidentified or identified.
Yes.
So then, given that it's 3:00,
I'll come back later.
okay,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That will not slow down the work here.
okay, and then so like come back later, like next month? I just don't know what our schedule looks like and want to make sure we're
Can you do
expecting.
next month? Next month? April?
April.
I can do that.
Can we not go
For those of us that,
Or do we want to check temperature and quorum for going over, or I don't know how long the conversation is, Tiffany?
I mean, I think the conversation is gonna be very similar to the AMI conversation that was just had. And so I don't mind regrouping with the housing team based on the conversation had on the bond funding. To go back and regroup and make sure that that's how we wanna move this forward. So I don't know if it's necessarily the most worthwhile conversation at this point.
Okay.
Let me regroup with them. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I do actually have some pretty strong feedback on it. But I'm thinking maybe I just go ahead and send an email to you.
Is it not related to the AMI? Is it related to the AMI? Is it related to the fact that it's an incentive? Like,
Yes.
so yeah, I would go ahead and send those, but I think that needs to also be part of the conversation.
Okay.
Which will happen next month then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a valuable conversation that they'll.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate that. I know we're out of time, but I just want to skip to 8 and see if there's anything there, update from Housing Authority Liaison, Housing Commissioners, or housing staff that we want to sneak in before we adjourn. Housing Commissioner Flores.
Norton today. I was just curious if we can continue to get updates on the bond funds for the down payment assistance. I know you sent out that email letting us know we're in that process of picking an administrator, and if there's any updates that you know now, great. If not, what are the thoughts of how long it's gonna take to?
RFP has been, the RSOQ has been published and has a response date of May 4th.
So that means what, in layman's terms?
I'm sorry, thank you. That means that the procurement is out and agencies that have the capacity to administer the funds have until May 4th to submit a response. At that point in time, they will be evaluated
I got it.
and they will then will award contract to successful respondent to that process.
And then from there, maybe another 30 days before it can be utilized.
Yes. After award contract, yes, I would hope June-ish.
I'll share it with you. There's a website.
The website is called Planet Bids.
You can sign up for it.
Oh.
And because I had some projects I was interested in, so now I get everything.
You don't have to get everything, you can check
I'm good
certain
with that.
boxes. Well, no, that's what I'm just saying, not everybody has to get everything.
That's good.
It can be overwhelming.
Any other comments, questions, or updates from commissioners, staff, liaisons?
Yeah, this is Eric again. Can we
Yeah,
make
Eric.
can we make a recommendation to expedite that? Just because by June, we're already, July, middle of July, we're on the downturn of our market. We'll be heating up in June. I think, if we can expedite that, get those funds available sooner than later, it'd be great.
Thank you for the feedback. We are as much as possible within the systems that we must work.
I understand.
Thank you. One quick update on housing authority wise, you may have seen in the paper. The city of Williams asked us to voluntarily take their housing choice voucher program. They don't have, it's 50 vouchers. They haven't had staff since September of 2023. They don't have the financial capacity to administer it. 50 vouchers is a hard amount to administer because of the requirements in contrast to the associated administrative funding. Been working on this since last May. The City of Williams City Council and their Housing Authority Board, which is the same body, approved transferring the program to us. Our Housing Authority Board and subsequently City Council have accepted the transfer of these vouchers. It means we will service vouchers in the Williams area, but any voucher. It's not 2 programs, it will be 1 program. It's essentially 50 additional vouchers being added to our local voucher inventory. Only about 18, between 18 and 22 of them are utilized in the Williams area right now. What I'm working on is are submitting documents to HUD tomorrow, which triggers their timelines. They have dictated time or response times to us. We should know by mid-June with a July 1 financial transfer date. It is cost neutral for our, it's actually cost positive for our community. It is bringing additional voucher resources. Heavily funded. We're receiving all of their reserves. There's some cleanup to do because they haven't had staff in place, but the lift is not massive and our staff is up for it. So that's a fairly big development there. General purpose vouchers without a targeted population, which are very hard to come by, especially in a quantity of 50.
Yay.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's been a big lift, but it is exciting and it's good to be able to, otherwise the vouchers would be lost. HUD would recapture them and we would lose them in the Northern Arizona region. So yeah, we're excited to add them to our portfolio.
Yay. Congratulations to staff and thank you for making sure we get those kept in Northern Arizona because that's huge. Exciting. And Haley said awesome. So
Thank you for putting that back up.
alrighty. Anything else? With that, I will adjourn at 3:05. Thank you so much for your participation, enthusiasm, and the robust discussion. I love it. We'll do it again next month.
Thank
You
you.
have to wait till May to get my poor abbreviation of the last century of urban planning issued.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Well, I turn red anyway when I'm like talking and so it's a combination of heat and that. I feel like I'm just red and
You feel
swollen.
my ears.